Introduce to you, once again, our very good friend Joe Loya, and I'll let him introduce his very special guest this evening, Joe Loya Sr. And before we give him a round of applause, I just want to mention to you we will have questions this evening, but we would like for you to fill out a piece of paper which will be passed to you, and then Joe, his father, will read the questions from whatever questions you submit to the library host. So thank you and welcome, Joe Loya.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I want to say a few things. One, this is live streaming to YouTube from that camera, and we're also on Periscope here, so people from around the world are going to be sending some questions maybe, and we'll be able to answer some of them at the end. I'm going to bring my father out here in a few minutes. I'm going to set things up, tell you a few things about, give you context to why this is happening, and then we can bring him out. I'll chat with him a little bit, and then you could ask questions from him. One, thank you for coming. This is going to be a powerful evening. This is the first time I have sat and spoke with my father about what happened to us in a public setting. He came to me last summer and said, hey, do you think there's any value in you getting up and talking about what happened to you and the violence in the home that I committed in the home and what it did to you, and then maybe I come out and I can share what I was going through so people can have a different understanding? I was like, hell yeah, there's value in that. So this is it. This is what this is about. Now, first thing I want to say is there was an incident when I was 16 that it was the pivotal moment where our house, you could say, fell apart. And we've been trying to piece it together since then. There was February, it was 1978, and my dad was beating my brother and I very badly. And during that time, he left. And when he left, I had a concussion. I went to the bedroom, I went to the kitchen, and I pulled out a steak knife. I came to the bedroom, and I locked my brother, who was a year and a half younger than me, in the bathroom. I told him not to come out, and when my father came home, primed for round two, what I thought was round two, I pulled out the steak knife. He saw it, and we were both paralyzed for a moment, and then I think he thought in my not doing anything that I didn't have the resolve to do anything, and so he said, put it down, and I said no. And then he started walking me, put it down, and I charged him, and I stabbed him in the neck, and I tried to twist it off to break it off in his neck and kill him. I thought it was going to be a kill shot. He yelled out, you killed me, you killed me. I ran out, and that was the beginning of us going into foster homes, and then eventually he worked really hard to get us back my senior year. I'm grateful. I have a couple friends of mine from high school here my senior year who knew me. It was a really, really turbulent time. And that violence awoke violence in me. I'd been a victim up until that time. And the power of that violence would eventually dement me so that I went on to commit a lot of violence with bank robberies and violence in prison and kind of almost destroyed my life with it. I got out of prison. I changed my life while I was in there. Had some moments of self-discovery, which I'll talk about with my father, where I realized we were the same, animated by the same grief, that our rage was actually the same. And I developed a strong compassion for him for the last 20 years since I got out in 1996. I've been working to reconcile, to get close, to develop a real righteous love story. And that's what we have now. So that's the context. There was this destruction in our home, the violence. My dad will tell you about what he felt when I stabbed him in the neck. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to dwell there, oh, what a bad man you were, why did you beat your kid, oh, horrible, horrible man, let's make him feel guilty. What I want to talk about is what has occurred since then. The conversations, the dance we've had to try and get together before I went to prison. What did he think when he started seeing my life start to go away? Did he feel guilt, and what responsibility did he feel? How do we come and miss, near misses, trying to get together, and then how do we finally get this? That's what I want to talk about. Those are your questions. You can ask those questions back there, but I'm not in a kind of place where I want to dwell on bad man, you were so evil, we can't let you go. I have some friends who meet my dad and they're prepared to hate him to the grave, and they're surprised how much I love him. So that's where I am, that's what we're going to be about. So without further ado, please welcome my father, Joe Loya Sr. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. It's long overdue.
Yeah. So, why don't we start off with, why now? You know, you came to me last summer, blew me away, just blew me away. What is it, where are you in your life that you feel like this is something you want to handle, you want to do?
I think two things. The first thing that comes to mind, and it's what I had to deal with for many years. I wasn't the best of fathers, okay? Plain and simple. There was a lot of shame that goes into that. Joe's book confronted me with things that I had tried to put aside and not address. But Joe was very candid in some of the abuses that I was involved in with regards to him and my other son, the violence that they saw in the home. It's very shaming. And especially when that's not the face that you put on with other people. The dissonance there that you have to deal with on a daily basis. It's the hiding, the feelings that, oh, people are going to find out. Oh, they did. My son, and I wasn't quite happy about everything as it transpired in the book, but it was a shove in the right direction. I needed to deal with these things. I needed to confront them as a father. I needed to do it for my son. I needed to do it for my granddaughter. And I also needed to do it for myself. That guilt you carry, the shame, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. And last summer I just said, I'm 71 years old. I've got to deal with this. You can't run away from it forever. If there's any good that can come, if I can, by my candor, just address these issues and encourage other people that have had problems with their children or themselves, then something good can come of it. And that's why it's now.
That's good. I didn't mention this, but when I was 9, actually yesterday, it was 45 years ago, February 4, 1971, my mother passed away. My dad and her met very young. They married when they were 16, and I was born then, a couple months later, and then she died when she was, like I said, 26. So it was hard after that. And I wanted to, I shared the story with my dad, and he didn't remember the details of it, but it was the most profound moment I had regarding us when I was in prison. I had begun to have compassion for myself. And I called my dad. I was examining all the violence I had done. I could locate all my insecurities that were ignited, that made me act this way. And then I was like, oh wait, so that meant that when my dad beat me, that meant that there was some insecurity there. And then I could identify what they were. But there was this one beating, and even me in my very clever, creative way, I couldn't understand why he beat me. And I happened to I got a concussion playing football. I came home, and my stepmother saw me keep asking, when's Dad coming? When's Dad coming? When's Dad coming home? When my dad came home, she explained that Joey's acting weird, and he had me sit down at the table, and he said, are you lying? And I didn't know because I had a concussion. And I said no, and then he punched me, and I fell off the table and off the chair. He said, get up. And I got up. Are you lying? No. Boom. And he punched me. So I'm in prison. I'm thinking, I'm like, of all the beatings, I didn't understand that one. So I called my dad. I said, Dad, listen, man, I'm not even angry about it. I'm just actually kind of baffled and curious. And immediately my dad said, I'm sorry about that. And you need to know, if I had a child today, knowing about what we know about brain injuries, I would take him to the hospital. He said, but here's what's going on. Here's what was going on with me then. You want to tell the story about Mommy?
Yeah. When my wife at the time, Bess, Joe's mom, was going through her problems physically. She had kidney disease, and which ultimately took her life. She went through a period there where she seemed to space out. She'd be talking to us or talking to me, and suddenly she would just stare up to the ceiling and start talking things that were very, very disconnected. There was nothing that she would talk to me about that made any sense to me. So I remembered that, and she would space out, and then she'd come back. And I went to the doctors and I said, "What's happening here?" They said, "We don't know. We have no idea why she's doing this. We don't know what's happening. Maybe it's the trauma that she almost lost her life a couple of times there." They had no explanation. It was scary. And on several occasions when we were in the car, she wanted to jump out of the car while I was driving the car on the freeway. There was a very difficult time there, lasted a little bit over a month, when she was completely disconnected from reality, thinking she was Elizabeth Taylor at times and referring to things that made no sense whatsoever. But
So my dad was explaining this to me, how when that happened, he had, when my mother was dying, he got to show her how much he loved her by juggling everything. He was taking the kids to school, he was working, he would go and visit her, and he was doing all these stressful things, but at least my mother could see how much he loved her. He could see in the work that he loved her, and there was love, and he was doing the right thing. And as stressful as it was, sometimes it was the only thing that kept him going. Bessie can see that I love her. Bessie can see that I'm doing the right thing. Bessie knows, Bessie knows, Bessie knows. And then when Bessie would switch off and she didn't know him, one night, for example, I remember this night, she was, "Get away from me," and he was like, "Bessie, it's me, I'm Joe. She thought he was a stranger. She didn't know who he was. And when I came home and I didn't know who I didn't know and I was spaced out, he wasn't punching me. He was punching the memory that came up and ambushed him of that traumatic moment of my mother. And he was basically saying, "No, get away. I do not want to deal with this emotional trauma right now." And I hung up the phone. I remember I was on the phone. And in prison, you don't want to show emotion. And you don't want to get off the phone showing emotion because that's a vulnerable time, and you don't want people are waiting in line, everyone can see you. So I like, "Okay, Dad, thanks," and I hung up. But I was kind of blown away. But the epiphany I had that I carry with me to this day is that the same rage that he had, the same rage that I had, was animated by the same wound, and that was the death of my mother. And that was boom. That was a light bulb, because then it allowed me to see my dad not as some monster other than me. It was like, oh, we are the same emotional landscape. We got the same emotional layout. It's easy for me to say, "Oh man, I get you. And for children to do that with parents is tough. Parents, it's just challenging. I've tried to understand it in other ways, and I'm a real son parent. We have, I have a disconnect there, but in this, I really had the connection. You want to say anything about that, Dad?
yeah, another reluctance that I had, and this one really stifled my being animated to discuss this openly and honestly with other people. First, I hurt when I hear what he says today. It's bothered me for years, and I'll share a story of why. But the other thing was my reluctance to explain what happened is that there's skepticism on the part of a lot of people. And for many years I said, if I open up, I'm going to try to explain things. They're going to think that I'm trying to make excuses for this. To try to, well, that happened, but let me tell you why. And I didn't want it to be that. The fact of the matter is that I was wrong. The fact of the matter is that when I wounded my son, I also wounded my own spirit. And it took me an awful long time to realize that. I only didn't damage my son, I also damaged myself. And it took a long time for me to come to grips with that reality. It wasn't a nice thing.
Yeah. Tell me about,
that night.
Yeah, tell me about tell me about what happened when I stabbed you, you had some reactions to the stabbing that kind of are interesting.
Okay, I think this is good because it'll explain something here that you can hopefully understand. When Joe first stabbed me, I fell to the floor. I was on top of him trying to look, everything's gonna be all right, just give me the knife, give me the knife. He was scared. He was scared. And what he did is just moved up, fell to the floor, and the next thing I felt was a knife in my neck. Instantaneously, it was just shock. I couldn't believe that had happened. But just as quickly, he turned the knife in my neck. I said, what an asshole. And the next thing, I'm serious, this is my thought. And then I had real clarity. And then I said, he didn't put this knife in you. You did. You did it, Joe. I realized at that point, I looked back at my son when I would come home. He was a little kid of about 5, 6 months old, sitting on the chair. And Bess would be cooking, and I'd walk in the door, and I'd sneak over to where it was in the kitchen, and I'd put my head in there, and he'd see me, and the minute he saw me, what was his reaction? Oh, he'd be hitting that, and a big smile, making all kinds of noises. Just the cutest little baby. I just felt I had the best baby in the world. And that all came to me, and I said, that child that you promised your wife, Bess, that you would take care of, you are responsible for this. You have pushed him to the point that he saw no other alternative but to do this. And I realized then I was responsible for creating an environment where it would animate a child to want to take his father's life. And along with it came an enormous sense of guilt that I had failed his mother, who had been nothing but a wonderful, beautiful person. And little by little, I began a long process of coming to realize that a father is not a dictator. A father is not that one dictates to his children, says, do this, do that, you gotta obey me. No. To be a parent is to be a person that's given a stewardship. You're a steward, and what are you gonna do with that? I botched it up. I did a lot of right things, but I also did some bad things. So I look back to that moment in time, and that began the process of I have to reach out to him.
Yeah.
And in a very strange twist, Joe, the perpetrator, becomes the victim in this story later. And the father wasn't the victim. He suddenly now has to realize, you're a perpetrator. You have a part in this. You can't just victimize yourself and say, hey, well, he tried to take my life. I could have gone down that road, but...
You did for a minute.
For
a minute you did.
Yes.
So one thing I will say, people have said that they want to know, so how do you start making moves towards each other? When do you start, after there's a stabbing, you go to foster care, how did you start repairing the home? And I want to say, my dad's did these dramatic bad things, and I told him this is how I lived my childhood. My dad did these cinematically bad things, like me. My movie, The Bank Robberies, are cinematic. They make a great movie. There's a bunch of boring stuff, and then there's these big, big, explosive moments. And my dad's actually, if you look at the violence that I endured, the bad violence, there were really dramatic, a few episodes, but the majority of the time in there was a lot of play, there was a lot of love, there was a lot of affection, and there was a lot of good stuff going on. My dad was actually a good faith operator. There were some moments where the stress, where the tension, where it was just a perfect storm of all those things, and he acted against his conscience. And like a lawyer, he did it in dramatic fashion. So, but there was a lot of good faith going on. For example, after we went into foster care, he immediately started coming to the foster homes. And he immediately was like, what do I got to do? And he jumped in every hoop. And every hoop he showed me, I'm going to earn the right to get back. I'm sorry, I did wrong. I'm going to do what they want me to do. I'm going to show you. Eventually, we felt safe enough to come to the home. We were only gone out of the home from February to September. And I came back for my senior year. And I'm embarrassed to say that actually my dad made the first gesture, like, hey, let's repair it. Come on home. Let's pray. Let's talk. And my dad did this weird thing that was a freakish thing, which you want to show real good faith. My dad was into theology. He was real big intellectual, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, all that stuff. And then he started reading these sort of like Christian self-help books. They had hearts on the front, and people holding hands, looking at each other. They had words like communication and joy. It was like 70s, right? Green avocado shag rugs in everybody's house. Disco, Earth, Wind, and Fire. So, like, I was like, wow, this man's changed. He's really into trying to like learn a different language and that was a real key for me, because the language is totally different from theology to like Christian self-help. But this was about emotion. This was talking a different way about emotions, which is cool. So I come home, and I was a jerk that whole senior year, because now the power accrued to me, and I knew that I could call him out on stuff, and I knew that I had the social worker on a kind of lightweight speed dial, because we didn't literally have speed dial back then. But you know what I mean. I felt like I had power behind me now. And so I was actually a jerk in the beginning when my dad tried to show good faith. And so, but he showed good faith. And then I just was relentless. And I started being angry. I started growing up and was confused and desperate. Dad showed good gestures. Here, let me get you a job. Here, you want to come live here for a while? Like, just time and again. And it was almost as if this niceness to me mocked me. Like, I didn't want to let it go. I wanted to be angry. And anger was the thing that actually felt good. I hadn't expelled it yet. And I wouldn't expel it until the 30 banks I robbed. I went to prison and ended up in solitary confinement for a couple of years. It would take a while to expel it. It was pretty congested. So people ask the question. I put out a bunch of questions to my friend. I'm going to ask one here. Joe, when you were resolving to heal the relationship, what were your dad's initial feelings towards healing the relationship? Or another question, why did your dad not attempt to heal the relationship first? If he did, why did you not let him? Let's start with the first one. What were your initial feelings towards healing the relationship? How did you look at it?
It was something that I had to do. I caused the problem. I felt I'm the one that's responsible. I'm the adult. I didn't always behave like one, but I was the adult. He was the son. I needed to reach out. I needed to make the changes. I needed to show him, not just talk about it, okay? And he jokes around about the books that I read. Well, actually, I went even further than that. I kept on reading other books, not having anything to do with faith. Put away my philosophy books and stuff and started reading less heavy stuff that had to do with this and science. And I began the process of change, but I knew it's me. I've got to take that step, and I've got to continue to accept the rejection. I've got to be the one that has to say, look, you created this, now you have to do something to solve it. You've got to give it everything you have. And it was discouraging at times. I mean, there were times when he was much less than noble, okay? He let me know he was in command, We've got a new sheriff in town, and it's the son, not the dad. Okay, and there were plenty of instances like
That's
that.
a horrible, lopsided place to be.
But you know what? The shoe was under the foot. The shoe was under the foot. If you want to look at it that way. But I loved my son. I loved Joe. I didn't always like him, but I never stopped loving him. And that, more than anything else, and in my faith, I wasn't brought up to act that way. That was contrary to the things that I believed in. I was the one that had violated certain standards, certain ways of behaving. And I needed to be the one that made those changes. And they weren't just words, they had to be proven in action.
Somebody asked me, what role did religion have in creating the hostile environment of my youth? What did it do in shaping the way you looked at discipline in the home? Did it influence you?
No, that was a cultural thing. A lot of people ask me that question. Well, was it your faith? Is it your religion? If anything, my faith taught me not to exasperate my child. And I'm quoting directly from the scriptures. It says, don't exasperate your child. And that's what I did. I was violating what I was supposed to be practicing. So it wasn't religion. If anything, it was a culture which I was brought up. Joe asked me the question about gangs the other day. I said, I really don't like to refer to that, but yes, I was in a gang in East Los Angeles. And yes, you can't be in a gang without violence. And when I went to school, the vice principal swatted you, big old, board. They called it the Board of Education or the Seat of Knowledge. Boom. And that's...
They did right when I was in junior high in 70s.
Yeah, I remember that. So I took this, this is standard, but, there were times when I hit Joe that, that's not what I'm supposed to do. I'd come to him and I'd say I'm sorry. But you can't be saying you're sorry and continue a certain pattern of behavior. Your sorry has to be backed up by not doing it again. It's like the guy that, gets drunk and spends all the money and comes home and pleads with his wife, take me back, I'll never do it again. Does that a couple weeks later. So, yeah, it had nothing to do with religion because...
and Grandpa beat you too. You don't like to talk about that though.
My dad's passed away and I don't like to, because my father and I had somewhat of an adversarial relationship from childhood, and I disappointed him in many ways, and it wasn't until he was 69, and he hadn't spoken to me for 2 years, and his attitude was, well, I've got 5 other children, if you don't want to talk to me, fine, I can always talk to these 5. You don't have another dad. Okay? So that was kind of the situation, and I had to reach out to my dad, and I said one day to myself, this is really unfair. I'm a son, and I get treated badly over here, and then I'm less than what I'd like to have a relationship with my dad. I've got a son over here, he's doing, why am I the victim? On both ends of the spectrum here, I realized something. I had to reach out to my dad and tell him I was sorry that I disappointed him. I was not the son he wanted. And it's a long process of healing. And the last 5 years with my father more than made up for all the years that my dad would just, get out of here, or stuff like that. But there were moments when he came to me and said, I'm really sorry for having treated you badly. And my dad, I loved him, and the last 5 years was everything I could ever want. Call me up and say, hey son, can you take me to the market today? And I will take you out to eat over there at Pepe's Mexican food. Yeah, of course. My favorite food is free food, okay? So, because of that.
Mexican.
Yes, right. So, needless to say, that I was brought up in a home where there was a lot of, my dad was in the service army, and he was a pretty strict guy, but he gave me a lot of good things in the process, too. He taught me a lot about a lot of things. So.
That makes me think about something, actually. If you think about it, so my grandfather passed away when I was in prison. He visited me a few times while I was in there. He's a funny man. He told me, his advice to me when I was in prison was, hey, when you get out, you need to learn Japanese or Chinese. That's what you need to learn. Forget Spanish. Japanese, Chinese. That was his thing, which is interesting. This is like 1991. Anyway, so Grandpa dies while I'm in prison, but my dad reconciled with him on the streets. And I remember thinking, and he had changed his life at 69, and he had all his children, he had cut them all loose. They were alienated from him, and alcohol had been his thing. It just really tore the family apart. But then everyone started reconciling with him. And it makes me wonder, that might have been the thing that was altering my imagination. I know for sure I thought, hey, Grandpa could change. When I started changing, I thought my grandfather changed at 69, and he had a really, really bad relationship with people. But I'm just starting to think right now that for, not only about personal change, but he might have been the blueprint for our relationship.
You know, my dad did do something. He stopped drinking. Alcohol had been his nemesis. He had a great mind, mathematician, loved math, loved all the sciences, and he loved languages. He spent 4.5 years in Japan, learned a lot of Japanese on his own, and when he was 69, he decided, I'm going to stop drinking. Well, we'd heard that song before 1,000 times, but he decided he would stop drinking, and guess what? He did. 2 years later, he died at 74, the last 5 years, no alcohol. He said to me 2 years later, he says, you know, Joe, he says, I used to walk in a room, and if somebody had a can of beer or a glass of wine, he said, I could taste that in my mouth. Next thing you know, I've got the can, I've got the wine, and I'm going to town. He said, now I can walk in a room. I can walk in a room and look at everybody drinking and have absolutely no desire. Cold turkey, no programs. He said he'd been to a lot of these, what are they, 12-step programs? AA. He said, yeah, we go to the AA meetings and go drinking after the meeting. He said, so it wasn't really helping me. But he made that decision, and he became very sensitive, open, telling me a lot about his life. These things he never did before. So I think my dad was an encouragement to me to keep going on that process. Not that it wasn't without its ups and downs, okay? When you begin the process of reconciliation, it doesn't go in a straight line and everything is great and everything just, you know, like the movies, just keeps getting better and better. No, you have those down times. You have those ups, you have those downs, but you gotta keep moving forward if you want reconciliation with the person.
So, I have friends who say they wish they could have a relationship with their parents, but the parents won't acknowledge that they won't acknowledge that what happened actually happened to them. They won't say they were bad parents. They won't say that they, some cases, they won't even acknowledge the abuse. If they can get in a conversation with the parent to talk about it. Some parents and kids won't talk about it. Tell me about, has it always been easy for you to just say, oh, okay, well, if you say that, I might not remember it, but okay, I'll just take your version over my bad memory? Or did you ever feel like you had to have some pushback? What's your relationship to that? The idea that our narrative trumps yours because we were the victim. Okay. How did that evolve over time for you?
You know, initially there's the reluctance to admit everything. You admit everything, but then you have to start parsing things out and say, okay, so if I did this, how am I going to deal with this in the future? And, you know, as I'm moving along the road of trying to prove to Joe and to Paul that I'm changing. I have to accept. It's not like, what would you say, concessive reactions where you're just conceding everything you say is correct. Some things I had my doubts about, but you know what? I came to the point where I said, if you're claiming that I did this and I don't remember it, I'm going to validate your claim. And I don't think all parents want to do that because there's a sense of having to admit, I failed. It's not easy when you're talking about having that stewardship of a child, when you realize, and there's a lot of denial. I've spoken to many parents over the years, and I tell them, you got to tell your child this, you got to do that. You've got to do it if you want to heal. Now, the price for healing, the price for reconciliation begins with the admission that you've made a mistake or that you've done something wrong. Because if you don't want to accept that, you're never going to move toward reconciliation. It doesn't mean, okay, well, I was a great dad, but doesn't appreciate me. I'm sorry, that kid, it was always wrong. It doesn't work that way. You're not talking about reconciliation. You're talking about blaming the other and justifying bad behavior. So yes, if my son says to to me, you did this and you did that, I go, if I really don't remember, I'll say to him, I'm sorry, son, but your dad's 70 years old, now 71. I don't remember everything as well as I used to. But if you say that's what I did, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to validate your claim.
I'm 54, and I have my friend right here. I got out of prison. He said, "Hey, remember when you did that?" Because we used to live together when I was younger, and I betrayed a lot of my friends when I was a young man. And he'd say, "Remember you did that?" And I didn't even do any violence to them, but I would be like, I can't remember. I did so much bad stuff that all kind of becomes a blur. So I understand that we can't keep track of all our bad behaviors. Who can? Who wants to? Gee whiz, my head would explode if I tried. Okay, so you know what? Let me ask a couple more questions. Do you have any questions you want to ask me, Dad?
No.
Okay. You know me so well. You don't need any more. Okay, so one friend asked, is there any topic that's off limit that pushes you or your dad to get defensive when you talk about the past or nearing bad territory of reality, pointing fingers? We don't do that, right?
No. I've never been a kind of person that yells. I don't like to be yelled at, and I don't yell. But when I get upset with Joe, who was a young kid, I'd say, if he had done something wrong, I'd say, "Come over here, buddy."
Yeah, it was never his buddy then. I was doing that.
And he said, later on, he said, "You know, Dad, when you call me your buddy, I knew I was anything but your buddy at that moment."
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think there's any topic that Joe and I that we're shy about discussing. I mean, there's been so much that's transpired in our relationship. And you know, like I said, and I don't use words empty. I don't just say a word to sound nice. The truth of the matter is that I love my son. I love Joe. And that's the prevailing emotion in my heart. I want to leave this earth knowing that I attempted to make peace with my son and with the people that I might have injured in this life.
When I was a kid, I really wanted to be a good, I wanted to love. I wanted to be kind. I wanted to be like my mom and dad. They were very loving people, very decent people, loving, gentle. My home, my environment was very loving when I was a little boy. And so I wanted that. I wanted to be that kind of person. And I think we all are, actually. I talk to guys, and when I go talk to men in prison, I try to acknowledge that everybody in that room, when they were little kids, the nobility that they had is their innocence. They all wanted to be loved, and they all wanted to love. They wanted that thing for the parent. Every kid, all of us want that. And I had that. I got rich love as a boy. A lot of affection, a lot of attention. And so I actually like that. I want that. That's my default. The disillusionment that I had from the death of my mother, the confusion and desperation I had, and the violence, all of that kind of demented me and threw me off. But I wanted to come back to that. And I feel like that's the thing that brought me to my dad. That's the thing that brought me back was I wanted to get to that. I got a daughter. You'll meet her in a little bit. 9-year-old daughter. And one of the things I think about when I think about my dad and I taking this hit and doing the talk and doing the hard work and getting together and talking it out and what do we do and what did that mean and how do we talking about it is because of her. It's like it happened to him. It happened to my grandfather. My grandfather did it to my dad. My dad did it to me. And we did that. And we get tonight say, okay, let's piece it together. And now we are the wall. It stopped. We took the hit. We get to talk about it. And we look at it like we took the hit. And we laugh. We get to laugh. There's joy here now. I remember, and then actually I'm going to open it up to questions. When I got out of prison, I just got out of prison. And I was living with my brother. And I was making a sandwich for my dad. I had a knife in my hand. I was cutting a tomato. I remember very clearly. My dad was facing, he was at the kitchen, the dining room table, facing the wall. I was on the counter here. I turned around and I saw a nodule on the back of my dad's head. And I put the sandwich down and I said, Dad, what's this here? And I touched him on the neck. And he looked up at me like weird, and I realized, oh, that's where I had stabbed him. And in that moment, that's when he said, you know, when you stabbed me, the first thing I thought was, I exasperated you. And the Bible says, don't exasperate your children. He said, but when you started twisting in my neck, that's when I thought, oh, that's just Joe being an asshole. Yeah. And he just released me from the guilt. I felt that moment like, oh, why did I touch that? Oh, my God. And that's like we get to talk about it, and we get to, it's not, we don't get to mock, I mean, we don't get to like, it's not jest, but it's a way of, we have an ability to talk about this conversation without getting stuck in it, without getting dark and gloomy with it. We get to hug and play and laugh later and have a good time with it. Anyway, so here's what we're going to do. If you have a question, people are going to pass out paper, write it, send it on up, and I'll read it out, and to me or my father, and we'll go from there. Anyone have questions? They have paper, they will pass to you, and you can write the question up. Right up here on the front, up here, anybody back there? You, young man, handsome young man in the front, you look like you might have a question.
No, he and I talked about all the questions already. He drove me up here today. Ryan is like family. He is family. We consider him that way.
Did we get any questions? Oh, hi Delia. So,
you want to read yours first?
I'm gonna do this question. Delia, how is your brother doing? Wait, what is this?
How's your brother doing with all this?
In all this? How is he doing? Well, we'll say this. My brother's a very private man. But my brother is here in spirit. He loves us. We love him. Interesting thing about my brother is he's a social worker. And he rescues kids from abusive homes. That's his gig. The irony of ironies, and we have multiple ironies in our home, is my brother started volunteering at a place called McLaren Hall, in LA, where they rescue abused kids, and they take them there before they put them in foster care. Well, McLaren Hall is where we went when they took us out of the home. My brother started volunteering there like the year after I got out of prison, 19 years ago. And my brother started volunteering, and he became so active in the involvement there that he ended up earning Volunteer of the Year in LA. So he went to go get this big ceremony to get Volunteer of the Year, a big plaque. Tommy Lasorda handed it to him, and who's at the table, the special table with my brother, earning this plaque for being this wise man who knows about abused children because he was an abused kid? My dad's sitting there loving them, and they're having this loving relationship. My brother has this wisdom. We have this wisdom because of this, because of our life. So when people get only upset about the things that happen to us, we don't. We understand that sometimes bad things happen, and you take the hit, and it ripples through you, and you have to struggle with it. But there is oftentimes you can turn this into something. My brother's a wise, compassionate, soulful, and very perceptive man who helps kids in ways that they can't even understand. And the thing he also offers them is he says, I was right where you are now. And they look at him and they say, oh my God, and you got a master's degree. He is a walking, living example of what they're going through. And that kind of pulling them through that is incredible.
He's a very noble man.
He's a loving and funny. Funnier than both of us combined. He's a very witty man.
Not so, but...
Yeah, what's the question you got there?
Same one.
Oh yeah, wow, interesting.
Did you and your father visit or communicate with each other while you were in prison?
Yes. My dad visited me in prison several times. And what do you remember about that?
I didn't like the way you were dressed. I thought your style had been sadly affected.
Yeah, it had been.
I felt the need to support him, encourage him, even though it was difficult at times. I remember once that Joe sent me a letter. He must have been going through a really tough time because he sent me this letter where he severely rebuked me for not being able to appreciate his genius. And I carried that letter. I must have read that letter 25 times in the space of a few days and such. I thought to myself, how do I answer this letter? I'm not upset about it. I mean, there's some value in the letter that he's correcting his dad's, puny IQ, whatever. And I said to myself, okay, I know what I'll do. So with tongue-in-cheek, I wrote him a letter humbling myself and acknowledging my ignorance and lack of ability to recognize
shame. I'm embarrassed.
I'm genius, Gary. And I gave him a nickname that I would forever refer to him as Sir Oracle. He enlightened me in the path of life. And I said, I promise you from henceforth to give you a loyalty that can only be characterized as canine.
That's true. I got that letter still.
And we had a lot of fun over that, and that was an eye-opener for me to say, instead of responding in what do you know? What are you talking about?
I got really enraged with my dad in prison. I actually became it dialed up before when I was in solitary. There was a period of time, and it was right around that time where the rage at my dad was. I thought I would come out and actually that I wasn't done with the violence. There was a moment of that before I fell apart, almost like a last-ditch effort to hold on to my rage. Somebody asked, did you have any family, friend, or community support during or after Bessie's death?
No. Well, yes and no. Yes. I had people that reached out to us. I had people that were very supportive in the sense that they talked to me.
The joint heirs.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Yeah, they did some really special things for my sons. They, for Christmas, they had a special party and they gave my children a whole bunch of clothes.
From the church or church group?
There was a woman who committed herself to bringing us a warm meal every week for 1 year, and she did it.
This is the one that Loya boys to have a hot meal. And they came, they would bring cornbread, and it was gorgeous.
Yeah, there were a lot of expressions of love and concern, and just saying, we're with you through this. So we saw that. We saw love being practiced. They had nothing. We weren't expected to give anything except of course, we gave them our gratitude, and they showed their love for us.
So afterward, what would you say was afterwards? After Mom and Dad, how did you feel? You didn't feel like the church, your church community was...
No, well, I was private. My grief was, I didn't feel that I could just open up and start. I felt that I was afraid to go down that road of grief because I felt that if I go down that road and I break down, who's going to take care of my kids? I'm a single father. I can't do that. I've got to suck it up, typical male thing, especially a Latin male. I got to suck it up. I am not going to break down in the day. My children need to see that I'm going to, stable. But of course, every night I came home and cried in bed. Later on, he told me, I used to hear you. And I did. I missed my wife a lot, and I did cry.
We all did.
Yes.
Okay, so there's another question. Here we go. Wow, here they come. Fast and Furious. Did you feel your dad was part of the reason you were in prison? What do you remember me? I'll let you read that. What do you remember me saying to you about blame? Did I blame you for moving to prison? What do you remember about that?
I don't think you ever blamed me for going to prison. I blamed myself for creating an environment where you saw that violence was a way to deal with things. And I said, who laid the example? I couldn't blame Brian. I couldn't blame anybody else. Brian was a noble guy. He tried to give Joe good advice, but it was me. I was the one that created that environment where it was being watered and nurtured. So when he got there, now that's not to completely exonerate Joe because he has a certain responsibility, but how he behaved. But it's connected. That action is connected to the home where I created that.
I always told people, my dad is not the reason I'm in prison. I would specifically say, I don't blame my dad for being in prison at all. What I blame my dad for, and what I can give him credit for, he altered my imagination when he punched me in the mouth or kicked me in the ribs. When he did that, I learned that violence was a way that you could deal with your problems. Eventually, my demented rage would use those acts to get me in more trouble that eventually led to me losing control and ending up in prison. But I never would say my dad's the reason I was. I never like, I'm here. If he had not done that, I wouldn't be here. I never said it that way to him. What do you got? Thank you both for sharing. How is it that you both are so and expansive? What is this? What is it? Erudite and expansive, yet we're both so violent. It seems incongruent. Okay, so that's interesting. Wow.
With me, I would have to I'd have to accept the fact that, for me at least, violence became a way that I saw that kind of activity in gangs. I saw people dealing with violence. And again, I got to be careful here that I'm not pawning off all this blame on somebody else without having, I had to make a decision whether I wanted to walk down that road or another road. You solve problems like this, and this is the way you get it done. So, yes, I remember a teacher of the 8th grade sitting me down and saying, he's the only teacher that ever did that in gym class. He called me into the room. He said, "What's wrong with you?" He said, "You're getting into fights." I said, "But I don't start them. I don't start these fights. People pick on me because I'm small." And he said, "You don't have to fight. You're one of the best athletes in the school. You do this, and this, and that." I think I embraced it as an alternative way of dealing with things. And I didn't see that road was a very, very, would be very, very destructive for me in later years.
I also think that erudite and expansive you can be erudite and expansive and be completely paralyzed by insecurity. Because ultimately what we're talking about is the kind of violence that you have to commit, to do the things we did. You have to be really insecure. You have to feel like everybody's a threat to you. I mean, for him to feel that we were threats to his maleness and his power when we were 9 years old, that's a level of insecurity I understand, because I would see a woman look at me on the street a certain way, and I was like, oh, she totally disrespected me, and I would have this outsized rage about that. We're talking about insecurity, which has nothing to do with erudition and expansiveness. And in fact, oftentimes people use erudition and expansiveness as cover for insecurity and rage.
Joe is so right. I'd sit down and read Kant. I'd read Kant and I would wrestle with his ideas. And then I'd turn around and spank my kids. And in many cases, for things that were really stupid. Those things there was a disconnect someplace, obviously. I was never at peace with that. Something within my spirit said, this isn't right. But how to go about dealing it was another thing. Somebody asked me this question, Joe Sr. How did you get the dialogue started to begin the process of repairing the relationship when anger still existed? Because I didn't have unrealistic expectations. I didn't expect Joe to accept the fact that I was sorry. Okay, look, I know I did this, and that, but I'm sorry. Let's start having a good relationship. When you have those kind of expectations that just a couple of I'm sorries are going to, gloss over everything. No, it's like peeling away layers, and it takes a while. And I knew that Joe had all this anger. It was evident. The way that he engaged with me in conversation and such was such that I knew he still got a lot of anger. I've got to give him his space to work it out. It took him a long time to work it out. much longer than I thought. But I needed to start the process by acknowledging my wrongdoing, and take it step by step from that point. And realize at times it was discouraging, but I knew I had to keep at it because I loved it.
How do you both deal with religion in a relationship if one is religious and the other isn't?
Religion has a real negative connotation, and I'm one of the classic examples that gives it that kind of a connotation. Okay? And that is really shaming, because when you pontificate about things and then you don't live up to that, what are you? I mean, I studied classical languages, and the word hypocrite comes from the Greek, wearing those masks. And I had to deal with that, and it was tough, and it was difficult for me to realize, yeah, you're a hypocrite, Joe. You really are. And boy, I beat myself up. I think that was the hardest, much harder than my son's work towards me. It took years. I mean, I used to beat the crap out of myself over things like that. Religion has a real negative connotation, especially when you start talking about ISIS and things like that. But even other religions, you know. And
How about here? How about between us? How do we deal with religion between us?
I think we deal with it very well. I accepted my son as an atheist. You know, what else can I do? Am I going to try and convert him? No. He is his own man. Do I pray for him? Yeah. Pray for myself a lot more too. You know? But I need it. You know, I'm at the point in my life where I can't be fixing other people. I'm 71 years old. I'm still working on myself, and I'm not where I wish I were. But yeah, no. I think the best expression of it is this. Do you remember The Godfather Part 3? When Michael Corleone got ripped off by the Monsignor and other gangsters, that they took $500 million from him, and he wants his money back. And he says, who can I talk to here in the Vatican? Somebody says, this particular cardinal is a man of faith. And they make that distinction in the movie. They make a very good distinction between the man that's religious and wants this, gimme, my name is Jimmy, you know? And so he was a man that they could go to, and they did. And when they go to that cardinal, Michael Corleone tells him the story, he sticks his hand in a pond that's right next to where they're speaking, pulls out a rock, and he cracks that rock in half, and he says to him something to the effect that, you know, Europe is filled with religion, but just like this rock, it's wet on the outside and dry on the inside. And if I, as a person of faith, have anything to say, it's a real indictment as to where so many that pontificate about religion stand today. I want to live, I have a simple faith, but it's real in my life. And it's not about beating up anybody or anything like that, verbally or physically, especially. I get beat up when I'm 71. Okay? But yeah, we don't have that. We can talk. You know?
Yeah, you're never trying to like evangelize me or anything like that. And the other thing too is I've developed a relationship with religion that's not super hostile. In fact, when I got out of prison and all my aunts were like, "Oh, we prayed for you," I'm like, "Oh, good, thanks." It seemed to have worked. I don't feel like, why would you pray? I don't get offended by it. If you want to pray for me, Godspeed. You know, so yeah, I don't have a problem. Joe, would you have been able to forgive your dad if he wasn't accountable? My father wasn't. He killed my mother, but I forgave him with no accountability for my healing, not his. I thank you, Father, from my heart for his accountability. Yeah. So here's the thing. I'm going to give you my quick thinking on forgiveness. I did not forgive my dad. And if people ask me, how did you forgive my dad? I say, I don't believe in forgiveness. I'm going to give you quick thoughts on this. I tried for years to forgive this man. And I would be like, I forgive him, I forgive you, Dad, I forgive you. And it never worked. And it always started because I forgive you. And when I was in prison, I was lying on my bunk, and I was trying to change my life, and I was thinking how I was going to change my life, and I knew one of the things I needed to do was figure this out. And this I'd never figured out. And one day I was realizing, you know why? Because when I say I forgive, you know what it feels like? It feels like when people, when I would tell, people would say something like, oh, your mother must be proud, and I would tell them, oh, my mother died when I was a kid, and then they would be like, oh, I'm sorry. there was a power shift all of a sudden that accrued to me that I was really uncomfortable with. I didn't like all of a sudden that they felt some weird thing beholden to me. Like, I didn't like that they were apologizing to me. They didn't do anything. That thing was weird to me. I thought it was unfair to them. And I don't know why the universe designed it, that people have to feel uncomfortable when they found out that my mother was... I didn't understand. I don't feel uncomfortable. And I felt like that's what it was like. Forgiveness felt like. It felt weird. It felt like it was a power thing. Like this. You did something to me. There's an imbalance in the universe. I am going to be magnanimous enough and bestow my forgiveness on you, and I will right the universe. It feels so egocentric. It felt to me in myself like no wonder it never worked. At the root of it was my ego. Always like delighting in, you forgave him. Look at how good you are. And of course I would be not letting it go because I loved being the center of that. What I decided instead to do, I started reading some Buddhist tracts, and what I decided to do was not be connected to him and not take what he did to me personally at all. What I said was, my dad had a dad who modeled bad behavior to him, just like he modeled bad behavior to me. All I could do was go in the world, because that's what I saw done to me. That's all that could be done to him. If you had lined up 100 sons, guess what? They would have all got the same treatment my brother and I did. Why? Not because he had it, because of him. It had nothing to do with us. And it was easy for me all of a sudden to say, I don't even take it personal. Physically, he hit me, and I bruised. I refused to take it personally, I said. And once I was able to look at my dad and say, poor kid. That kid was like me. He was loving. He was a good dude. He was a sweet man. Like I started out like a little boy. He was a sweet boy. And his dad and his parents didn't see it. They didn't know how to reach out to them. They didn't know how to nurture them. They didn't have the language. They didn't have the education. And they modeled bad stuff. And he grew up confused. He had a lot of love. And he still grew with a lot of decency. You see him here. Very expensive. Very generous. Very nice guy. He had all that already from the gate. But they demented him in ways that he would act against his conscience. It was easy for me to see this has nothing to do with me. Dad, you're on your own thing. And like I said, like he said earlier, I saw when he punched me in the face, he was really punching himself in the eye. It had nothing to do with me. I said this once at a writer's conference of Frank McCourt of Angela's Ashes. Frank McCourt came up to me afterwards and he was like, man, my dad was a horrible man. My brothers and sisters died because that man drank. And Frank McCourt said, and people have always wondered why I didn't forgive him. I couldn't really explain it like this, but that's exactly it. I never felt a desire to forgive him. I never forgave my dad. I have compassion for him, which means I don't take it personally. I don't need to forgive him. So that's my little thing on that.
Can you say something? I just want to be really careful here. Whatever difficulties I went through with my dad, I want to be really careful and very candid here. My father went through, and I don't want to, go into any detail, but my dad lived a really tough life. He had a really tough life.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely tough, difficult. As stepfather, it was brutal. Okay.
Of course.
Yes. And so, my mother shared that story with me, and it's interesting that when she did, I looked at my father differently.
Yeah.
I realized it explained a lot of things to me. I didn't totally exonerate everything he did, but it made me have a more realistic view of my dad. One of the things that Joe shared with me when he came out of prison, and it was astounding to me because he said, hey Dad, you know what I found out? I used to think you were the worst dad in the world. He said, you're just absolutely, man, I was really angry with you. He says, when I went in there, I found out there's a whole lot of fathers a lot of you. He said,
there's fathers doing time with their sons and their cellmates.
Yeah, he said, Dad, you're not the worst. Some comfort, okay? Some comfort.
Dad, there's this and you're no. So we're going to have to wrap this up. What I want to say is a couple of things. Wasn't able to get to a couple of these questions here, but I want to end it on one note. My daughter was born 9 years ago, and I started learning pretty quickly that I was doing these things that were working with her. I was doing these things and I was being playful. I was doing these things and it was easy. It was easy to move to certain things. It was easy to move towards, it was just easy. And I realized these are default things. Some of the things I had been mindful about, I wanted to be a certain way. I had thought about how I was going to react in certain situations. But I realized what I'm doing is actually what my dad did to me. And it was an epiphany, another one of those epiphanies. I was like, man, that dude did a lot right. All those years, you know, like I said, it was a highlight. This is where I started seeing the stuff rippling through me. I already had acted the bad dad. I already done that stuff out of my life, the bad modeling, and I dialed that bad down, and I was dialing up all the good, and all this good stuff was going on. I would tell her, I would call me, Dad, you know what I just did? I did this, and she did that. That's you. That's you. You're here with me. You're in me still. And I would tell him, hey, Dad, and he would be very quiet, like, wait, what's going on? Is he actually like telling me something good about? Wait, when's the other boot gonna drop? Like, it was very uncomfortable for me to tell him, man, Dad, you're a good dad. You're a good dad. Not just like a platitude, but to say, when you were doing this in the home at this time, when you were doing that, I remember this is what's going through me. So we're here today because for the last 9 years, I've seen that the good stuff is coming through me now. The good stuff is rippling through me. And my dad has been able, over this time now, to have an entirely different view of his parenting. It's not just, I was just this bad dad, I was this supremely bad dad. And I think that a lot of my friends are like, how did your dad change? Part of it is I changed toward my dad. You know, we think we only want our parents to do all the work. And the truth of the matter is that I've taken a lot of responsibility to work on myself and alter myself and try to change and reframe my dad and step at him sideways. So that's also part of it. Would you say over the years you've seen that? Yes. I mean, okay, good. I'm tooting my own horn and I'm saying, validate. Yes, Dad, tell him I'm good. So, do you have anything you want to say about the great crowd before we go?
I'm hoping that this time has meant something to each one of you in a personal way. If some of you have learned something or been encouraged, that will make this evening successful for me. I said to Joe, I don't mind now sharing our narrative if it's going to be helpful to people. To share it and to pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, look at how great we are. That's not the purpose. At least, you know, I know Joe, we've spoken about it. It's not that at all. It's that somebody would be encouraged to move forward, to bring some reconciliation. You know, somebody said something about a mother that was killed by the dad. And yes, you know, you stepped forward and you realized it was important for you, even though the dad is gone. Joe said, you didn't believe in forgiveness. I'm still there. You know, yeah, forgiveness is a word, but the actions are what is important here. Yeah, it heals you. You have to heal.
You bring up a good point. I don't want to demean anyone who forgives. I'm saying for me personally, I couldn't forgive. The way I was able to get back to my dad was this compassion model is what worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know a lot of people who build their relationship with people through the model of forgiveness. It works for them. And I have friends who would say the same as me. For 30 years, they couldn't forgive their dad. Their dad's been in the grave for 15, and they still can't forgive him. So I just share my view of it, and it seemed to work for me. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming out. It's a hard subject. Thank you so much. Sorry to turn my back on you. Isn't she pretty?